Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. The sepia-toned photograph sits unassumingly in the county archives, labeled simply Holloway Children's Home, Summer 1911. The edges are frayed slightly, with one corner missing entirely, casualties of time and neglect. 15 children stare back at the camera, arranged in 3 neat rows on the orphanage's front steps. Their faces bear the stoic expressions common in photographs of that era, when exposure times demanded stillness and smiles were considered inappropriate for formal portraits. The building behind them stands tall and austere, a 3-story Victorian structure with narrow windows and elaborate woodwork, typical of institutional architecture from the turn of the century. A matron stands at the far left, her high-collared black dress and severe hairstyle projecting the stern authority expected of those who managed such establishments. For decades, this photograph remained just another artifact of the county's history, filed away with countless other images documenting life in the early 20th century. That changed when a graduate student researching the history of child welfare institutions made a disturbing discovery. The meticulous records of Holloway Children's Home, preserved in bound ledgers with immaculate penmanship, listed every child who passed through its doors. Names, ages, dates of arrival and departure, all carefully documented. The ledger for 1911 specifically recorded 14 children in residence during the summer months when this photograph was taken, yet the image clearly shows 15 children. The discrepancy might seem minor, perhaps a clerical error, or a visitor captured in the moment, but the Holloway home was known for its exceptional record-keeping. The matron who ran the institution, Mrs. Edith Blackstone, had been a bookkeeper before accepting her position, and contemporaries noted her obsessive attention to detail. Not a penny, nor a child, went unaccounted for under her watch. Each of the 14 documented children can be identified in the photograph through cross-referencing with individual case files. Their names, ages, and distinctive features match the written descriptions, which leaves the 15th child, a girl of perhaps 9 or 10, standing in the back row, third from the right. Her dress matches the others. Her hair is arranged identically to the other girls. Nothing about her appearance suggests she doesn't belong. Yet according to every official record, she did not exist. Local historians have examined birth records, death certificates, and census data from surrounding counties. No missing children were reported during this period who match her description. The other orphans who survived to old age were interviewed in the 1980s as part of an oral history project. None recalled a 15th child. More disturbing still is what happened in the months following this photograph. 3 children from Holloway died that autumn during a scarlet fever outbreak. Their names are recorded in the cemetery behind the orphanage, their small gravestones still visible today. But witnesses from the neighboring property reported seeing 4 small funerals. Who was this 15th child? Why does she appear in the photograph but nowhere in the records? And what happened in that orphanage during the autumn of 1911 that someone wanted to erase? I traveled to Morriston County last week to examine the Holloway records myself. The archive building sits on a quiet street, its red brick facade weathered by over a century of harsh winters. Inside, time seems suspended, the smell of old paper and wood polish hanging in the air as sunlight filters through tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the silent rooms. The archivist, a woman named Margaret Eldon with silver-streaked hair and wire-rimmed glasses, greeted me with cautious professionalism. When I mentioned the Holloway photograph, her expression changed subtly. "That old business," she said, her fingers drumming once on the polished desk. "I suppose it never really went away." She led me to a climate-controlled room where the Holloway records are kept in acid-free boxes. The ledgers themselves were bound in faded leather, their pages yellowed but remarkably preserved. Mrs. Blackstone's handwriting flowed across each page in perfect copperplate script, meticulous, controlled, and utterly consistent. I spent hours comparing the ledger entries with the documents in each child's individual file. The 14 children were documented exhaustively. Medical examinations upon arrival, monthly height and weight measurements, school progress, even temperament notes. Each child existed on paper as thoroughly as they had in flesh, except for the 15th. "There was an investigation, you know," Margaret said when she brought me tea late in the afternoon. "In 1932, a journalist became interested in the story. He interviewed some of the surviving orphans who'd been adopted out. She disappeared briefly, returning with a slim folder containing newspaper clippings from the Morriston Herald. dated March 1932. The headline read, "Holloway Home Mystery Remains Unsolved After 20 Years." The journalist, Thomas Fernsby, had tracked down 6 former Holloway residents. Most remembered little of significance, their childhood memories blurred by time and perhaps trauma. But one woman, identified only as Miss L, claimed to remember the mysterious 15th child. "We called her Echo," Miss L told Fernsby, "because she came after everyone else had gone to bed and was gone before morning bell. The matron told us never to speak of her, that she wasn't really there. We thought it was a game at first." The article went on to describe how Miss L claimed the girl appeared shortly after a visiting doctor had conducted examinations of all the children that spring. The matron had seemed agitated during his visit, particularly when he spent time examining one of the older boys for what he called signs of congenital abnormality. What's particularly unsettling is that following Fernsby's article, the official investigation was abruptly closed. The journalist himself moved to Chicago 3 weeks later. Miss L reportedly retracted her statement, claiming she had fabricated the story for attention. I found one more curious detail while examining the financial records. During summer 1911, Mrs. Blackstone requisitioned additional food and supplies beyond what 14 children would require. The excess was exactly what one would expect for a 15th child. Yet in her meticulous accounting, she attributed this to anticipatory provisioning for expected new arrivals that, according to the intake records, never came. As evening fell, I found myself unable to leave the archives. Something about the discrepancies in the records kept drawing me deeper into the mystery. Margaret had reluctantly agreed to let me stay after hours, leaving me with a small desk lamp and strict instructions not to remove anything from the room. "The cemetery records are in that cabinet," she'd said before departing, pointing to an ancient oak filing cabinet in the corner. "Though I doubt they'll tell you anything new." She was wrong. The burial records revealed something the newspaper accounts had missed. While 3 children were indeed buried in the Orphanage cemetery following the scarlet fever outbreak, William Thornton, aged 7, Mary Collins, aged 5, and Frederick Jenkins, aged 8, the groundskeeper's log showed 4 graves had been dug. The 4th was listed simply as unconsecrated earth north corner. No name, no date, just a location. I sketched a rough map based on the description and made plans to visit the cemetery the following day. That night at my hotel, I spread my notes across the bed. Something about Mrs. Blackstone's behavior following the doctor's visit nagged at me. I retrieved my phone and searched medical practices from the early 20th century. The results made my stomach turn. That era had seen the rise of eugenics in America. Doctors regularly examined institutionalized children for signs of what they called feeble-mindedness or moral degeneracy, pseudoscientific concepts used to justify horrific treatments. Children deemed defective were sometimes subjected to experimental procedures, sterilization, or simply disappeared into more restrictive institutions where they often died from neglect. Could the mysterious 15th child have been one the doctor had marked for such a fate? Had Mrs. Blackstone been hiding her, first from authorities who might take her away, then from the records after her death? Morning found me at the old Holloway Cemetery. Now part of a public park, the small plot of land remained separated by a low iron fence. The graves inside maintained but rarely visited. I counted the markers, 27 in all, spanning the orphanage's 40-year history. Each stone was simple but dignified, bearing a name, dates, and the same inscription, "In God's care." I made my way to the north corner. No headstone marked the spot described in the groundskeeper's log, but the ground there seemed slightly depressed, as if something beneath had settled over many decades. The grass grew darker, thicker in that corner. As I stood contemplating this unmarked grave, an elderly man appeared at the cemetery gate, watching me with undisguised curiosity. "You're here about the ghost girl," he said. It wasn't a question. His name was Harold Winters, 86 years old. He'd lived his entire life in the shadow of the former orphanage. "My grandmother worked in the kitchen there," he explained as we sat on a nearby bench. "She wouldn't talk about it much, but sometimes, after too much elderberry wine at Christmas, she'd mention the girl they couldn't save. Said the matron brought in a local woman, not a proper doctor, to try to fix what was wrong with her. Something the visiting physician had planned to do anyway, but Mrs. Blackstone wanted it done quietly, by someone who wouldn't report it." Harold looked toward the north corner, his rheumy eyes distant. "Something went wrong. The girl died. My grandmother said they buried her at night with no prayer and no marker. Mrs. Blackstone declared they would never speak of her again, said it was more merciful that way. I couldn't shake the conversation with Harold from my mind as I returned to the archives the next morning. His grandmother's story aligned with the evidence I'd found, but crucial pieces were still missing. What condition had the doctor identified? What procedure had gone so terribly wrong? Margaret greeted me with a brown paper package. Found this in deep storage this morning. It was misfiled with the 1930s hospital records. Inside was a leather journal, its pages filled with the same meticulous handwriting as the orphanage ledgers. It was Mrs. Blackstone's personal diary, spanning from January to December 1911. The early entries revealed little beyond mundane administrative concerns, but the tone shifted dramatically following the doctor's visit in April. Mrs. Blackstone wrote about the cruel ignorance of modern medicine and her determination to protect all my children from butchery masquerading as science. One passage from May 3rd chilled me. Clara arrived today. I've created no official record, as promised to her mother. The doctor would surely take her away if he knew she was here. Her fits are concerning, but not the demonic possession that fool physician claimed. The other children have been sworn to secrecy. They understand the consequences of betrayal. Clara, finally, a name for the 15th child. The entries through summer documented Mrs. Blackstone's increasing paranoia about officials discovering Clara's presence. She mentioned administering herbal remedies to control the girl's seizures. Likely epilepsy, I realized, often misunderstood as something supernatural in that era. Then came the September entries, growing increasingly frantic. Clara's fits worsened despite the tinctures. Mrs. Harlow suggests a procedure she learned from a traveling surgeon. I hesitate, but what choice remains? The new medical inspector visits next month. 3 days later, God forgive me, the procedure was not successful. Clara passed at 20 minutes past midnight. No one must know what happened here. The children believe it was the fever. Better they think that than know what we did trying to save her. The final entry about Clara simply stated, she was buried without ceremony. May God have more mercy than I showed. The photograph with Clara must be destroyed once a new one is taken. No trace can remain. Clearly, Mrs. Blackstone had failed to destroy the photograph. As I closed the journal, Margaret appeared with a thin file folder. There's one more thing you should see. After the 1932 investigation was closed, Mrs. Blackstone suffered what they called a nervous collapse. She was institutionalized at Graywood Asylum. She placed before me a yellowed patient intake form. There, under reason for admission, a doctor had written, patient exhibits profound delusions regarding a deceased child named Clara, who supposedly visits her nightly. Claims the child stands at the foot of her bed, silently watching. Patient becomes violent when told no such child exists. I felt a chill despite the warm archive room. The curious thing, Margaret said quietly, is that the original photograph disappeared from county records in 1933 when Mrs. Blackstone died at Graywood. It reappeared in 1958 when the asylum was demolished, found sealed inside the wall of her room. I studied the photograph again. In the failing light of afternoon, I noticed something I'd missed before. The shadowy face of the 15th child seemed slightly blurred, as though she had moved during the long exposure, while all the others remained perfectly still. The photograph remained on the table between us, Clara's blurred face seemingly watching as shadows lengthened across the archive room. Margaret had gone home, leaving me alone with the records and my thoughts. Something about the timeline still troubled me. I returned to Mrs. Blackstone's journal, carefully reviewing the entries surrounding Clara's death. The matron had written that the other children believed Clara died of fever, yet the scarlet fever outbreak wasn't documented until nearly 3 weeks after her secret burial. It seemed an oddly prescient lie, unless the fever wasn't coincidental at all. Turning to the medical records, I examined the details of the outbreak more carefully. The first case appeared exactly 4 days after Clara's burial in the unconsecrated ground. The infection spread rapidly through the orphanage, ultimately claiming those 3 documented victims. I recalled something from my graduate studies about 19th century disease theories, the miasma concept, the belief that foul vapors from decomposition could spread illness. While scientifically inaccurate, this belief was still widely held in rural areas well into the early 20th century. Had Mrs. Blackstone connected the outbreak to Clara's improper burial? Did she believe the girl's spirit had brought disease as retribution? My phone chimed with an email notification. A local historian I'd contacted earlier had sent cadastral maps of the property from 1920, when the orphanage underwent renovations. I opened the attachment, comparing it to earlier blueprints. Something significant had changed after the fever outbreak. The north corner of the cemetery, where Clara lay in her unmarked grave, had once been just yards from the orphanage's water well. After 1912, a new well appeared on the opposite side of the property, and the original was filled in. I gathered my notes with trembling hands. The implications were disturbing, not supernatural, but tragically human. Clara, hidden from authorities, subjected to an amateur surgical procedure, then buried hastily and improperly near the water supply. The subsequent fever outbreak wasn't spiritual vengeance, but simple contamination. Yet this practical explanation didn't account for everything. Why had Mrs. Blackstone claimed to see Clara's ghost years later? Why had the photograph vanished and reappeared in such peculiar circumstances? As I packed my materials, a small envelope fell from between the pages of the journal, something I'd overlooked. Inside was a scrap of paper, torn from a larger document, containing just one sentence in handwriting different from Mrs. Blackstone's. The twins must never know they were separated. Twins. The possibility hit me with startling clarity. I rushed back to the photograph, studying it with new eyes. Clara stood in the back row, her features indistinct but similar to, almost identical to, another girl in the front row. Emily Westbrook, according to the records, one of the survivors who had been adopted by a wealthy family in 1913. I checked Emily's intake records again. She had arrived at Holloway in 1910, age 6, surrendered by a mother who could not care for 2 children. No mention of a twin. Had Mrs. Blackstone hidden Clara to keep the twins together unofficially, against someone's wishes? Was Emily told her sister had died in the fever outbreak, never knowing the truth? As darkness fell completely outside, I made a decision. Emily Westbrook would have been around 95 now, if still alive. Tomorrow I would find out if the surviving twin knew what happened to her sister, or if she too had been visited by a girl who officially never existed. The morning brought an unexpected hurdle to my investigation. I'd located Emily Westbrook, now Emily Prescott, through public records. She was indeed alive at 96, residing in an assisted living facility just 40 miles from Morriston. But when I called to arrange a visit, the administrator informed me that Mrs. Prescott had suffered a stroke 3 months prior and could no longer communicate verbally. She understands everything, the administrator explained, but cannot speak or write responses. Her granddaughter visits every Thursday if you'd like to speak with her instead. Thursday was tomorrow. I agreed to the meeting, then returned to the archives to search for any connection between the twins that might have survived in the records. Margaret had unearthed personnel files from Holloway, including applications and references for staff members. Mrs. Blackstone's own application from 1907 revealed something fascinating. Before becoming matron, she had worked briefly as a nurse assistant at a private asylum where moral treatment of female patients included separating mothers from children deemed products of sin. There was a philosophy then, Margaret explained, that twins born to unwed mothers were particularly problematic. One child might be kept and raised properly, while the other was institutionalized or adopted far away. They believed that separated twins would escape the moral taint that supposedly strengthened between them. So Clara and Emily's mother may have been forced to surrender one twin while keeping the other? I asked. Until something happened to the mother, perhaps. Margaret nodded. Then the second twin would have arrived at Holloway, and Mrs. Blackstone recognized the connection. The next day I met with Catherine Prescott, Emily's granddaughter, a composed woman in her 50s with striking blue eyes, reminiscent of the children in the Holloway photograph. She listened intently as I explained my research, showing her copies of the records, and finally, the photograph itself. Grandma Emily never mentioned a twin, she said, studying the image carefully. But there was something. Every year on September 23rd, she would light a candle and sit with it until it burned out. When I asked why, she would only say it was for the other half of her heart. September 23rd, the day after Clara had died, according to Mrs. Blackstone's journal. Catherine agreed to take me to meet her grandmother. She can't speak, but she might react to the photograph. I should warn you, though, she's had a lifelong fear of cameras. Never allowed her picture to be taken if she could avoid it. At the facility, we found Emily in a sunny room, her thin white hair neatly combed, alert eyes tracking our entrance. Though frail, there was something dignified in her posture, her hands folded precisely in her lap. Catherine explained who I was while I nervously held the folder containing the photograph. When Emily nodded slightly, I removed it and placed it gently in her hands. The change in her expression was immediate and heartbreaking. Her fingers trembled as they traced the outline of Clara's blurred face. Tears welled in her eyes, and she made a soft sound, not quite a word, but clearly an expression of recognition and loss. Then she did something unexpected. With shaking hands, she turned the photograph over. There, in the bottom corner of the backing paper, barely visible, were 4 tiny words written in a child's uneven script: Emily and Clara forever. Something scratched at my hotel door in the night. 3 distinct taps, followed by silence, then 3 more. My sleep-addled mind struggled toward consciousness as I checked my phone. 3:17 in the morning. "Hello?" I called, hesitating before approaching the door. No answer came. The hallway light created a thin golden line beneath my door, interrupted briefly by what looked like small shadows. Footprints? I peered through the peephole, seeing only the empty corridor. When I finally gathered courage to open the door, I found a single white candle placed neatly on the carpet, unlit but warm to the touch, as if recently extinguished. I barely slept after that. Morning found me back at the facility, determined to ask Emily Prescott more questions despite her inability to respond verbally. Catherine had suggested a simple system, 1 blink for yes, 2 for no, that might yield some answers. "Mrs. Prescott?" I began gently, once Catherine had explained why I'd returned. "The photograph with your sister. Did you write the message on the back?" 1 blink. "Yes." "Did Mrs. Blackstone know you'd written it?" 2 blinks. "No." "Did you know what happened to Clara? The real reason she died?" Emily's face contorted, her eyes closing tightly before opening again. 1 slow, deliberate blink. "Was it because of seizures? They tried to surgically cure her epilepsy?" 1 blink, accompanied by tears. Catherine took her grandmother's hand. "You never told anyone about this?" 2 rapid blinks. Then, with visible effort, Emily raised 3 fingers. "3 people knew?" Catherine asked. 1 blink. "You, Mrs. Blackstone, and the person who performed the procedure?" 1 blink. I hesitated before asking my next question. "Emily, after Clara died, did you ever see her again? Not just in dreams, but like she was really there?" The old woman's face transformed. For a moment, despite her 96 years and recent stroke, I glimpsed the child from the photograph, frightened, yet determined. Her hand trembled as she raised it, fingers spread wide. 5 times, Catherine interpreted. "You saw her 5 times?" A single certain blink. "Was the last time recently?" I asked, thinking of the candle outside my door. 2 blinks. "No." "When was the last time?" Catherine asked. Emily's gaze shifted to a calendar on her wall. With tremendous effort, she pointed first to the year, then September, then counted out days with labored movements of her finger. "September 23rd, 1958, Catherine read, looking at me with widened eyes. "The day they found the photograph in Mrs. Blackstone's asylum room." My skin prickled with gooseflesh. "That was the day the photograph reappeared." Emily nodded emphatically, then reached for Catherine's purse, making a writing motion. Catherine produced a notepad and pen, placing them carefully in her grandmother's hand. With agonizing slowness, Emily managed to scratch out 5 nearly illegible words. She wanted someone to know. Morning found me struggling to comprehend what Emily had revealed. The connection between Clara's final appearance and the photograph's discovery couldn't be coincidental. I returned to the archives with new questions burning in my mind. Margaret had arrived early, her expression troubled as she handed me a faded manila envelope. "Found this in the basement storage. It was misfiled with asylum records from another county. Inside were medical examiner photographs from Clara's makeshift surgery, graphic clinical images that turned my stomach. The procedure had been crude trepanation, drilling holes in the skull to release what they believed were evil spirits causing her seizures. No wonder Mrs. Blackstone had hidden these horrors. But among these disturbing images was something else entirely. A small tin-type photo of twin girls, perhaps 4 years old, sitting side by side in identical dresses. On the back, in faded ink, Clara and Emily, age 4, living with Aunt Judith after Mother's passing. So the twins had been together before Holloway. Something had separated them, sending Clara somewhere else until she reappeared at the orphanage. I spread everything across the table. Photographs, journal entries, medical records. seeking connections I might have missed. The twins' apparent reunion at Holloway occurred shortly after the visiting doctor had examined the children. Had he recognized Emily as a twin previously separated through eugenic practices? Was he planning to take her away for study? Had Mrs. Blackstone, despite her many flaws, been trying to protect both girls by hiding Clara's existence? As afternoon shadows lengthened across the table, Margaret approached with a cup of tea and an unexpected revelation. "I recognized a name in those medical files," she said quietly. "Mrs. Harlow, the woman who suggested the procedure. She was my great-grandmother." I nearly dropped my tea. "Your family was involved?" Margaret nodded grimly. She was considered a wise woman in these parts. Not a doctor, but people trusted her knowledge of herbs and folk medicine. I had no idea she participated in anything like this. She placed an ancient leather-bound book on the table. This was her remedy journal. It might explain what really happened that night. Together we pored over the cramped handwriting, finding an entry dated September 22nd, 1911. Performed relief procedure on young girl with falling sickness at Holloway. Matron assisted. Child did not survive. God forgive us. The sister walked in during final moments, saw everything. No wonder the poor thing went silent afterward. Matron says she'll handle the child, make her forget. Used suggestion that the sister died of fever like the others. Doubt it will hold. I looked up, stunned. Emily witnessed her sister's death. Then they convinced her it never happened. Margaret nodded solemnly. And the most merciful explanation is that Clara's appearances were Emily's fractured memories resurfacing. Her mind's attempt to reconcile what she'd been told with what she'd actually seen. But that didn't explain the candle outside my door, still warm as if recently extinguished, when no one had been in the hallway. "Perhaps," Margaret whispered, "some secrets refuse to stay buried, whether we call them memories or ghosts." I returned to the cemetery at dusk, drawn by an inexplicable certainty that I needed to see Clara's unmarked grave one more time. The autumn air carried a biting chill as shadows lengthened across the weathered headstones. Something had been troubling me since meeting Emily. The 5 appearances she'd mentioned, 5 times when Clara had seemingly manifested, culminating with the photograph's reappearance in 1958. Yet according to Harold Winters, Mrs. Blackstone had also seen Clara standing at the foot of her bed at Graywood Asylum. These visitations formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. The cemetery stood empty and silent as I made my way to the north corner. The depression in the ground seemed more pronounced than before, as if the earth had settled further just in the past few days. I knelt beside it, placing my palm against the cool grass. "What are you trying to tell us, Clara?" I whispered. A sudden breeze scattered fallen leaves across the graves. As they settled, I noticed something peculiar. 5 leaves had arranged themselves in a perfect line pointing from Clara's unmarked grave toward the former orphanage building. Following their direction with my eyes, I realized they aligned precisely with one specific window on the 3rd floor. The old Holloway building had been converted into municipal offices decades ago. Most workers would have gone home by now, but something compelled me to investigate. 20 minutes later, I stood in a narrow hallway before a door labeled Records Storage. The door was unlocked. Inside, metal shelving units filled with boxes stretched toward a high ceiling. A single window, the very one visible from the cemetery, was partially obscured by a filing cabinet. Something about its placement seemed deliberate, as if positioned to hide the window from casual view. I moved the cabinet with effort, revealing a windowsill covered in decades of dust, except for a perfect handprint, too small for an adult, a child's handprint, preserved somehow despite years of neglect. Behind the cabinet, I discovered a loose floorboard. Beneath it lay a small tin box, rusted but intact. My hands trembled as I lifted it. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small object wrapped in fraying cloth. The paper contained a child's drawing, 2 identical girls holding hands, one with a halo above her head. Beneath them, in careful lettering, 5 times I will come. When the last secret is found, I can go to my rest. The cloth-wrapped object was a locket. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, each showing one of the twins. Something dark stained the metal, dried blood. As I held it, the air around me seemed to thicken. The temperature plummeted so rapidly my breath clouded before me. In the window glass, I saw a reflection that wasn't my own. A small girl in an old-fashioned dress, her face sorrowful yet determined. I turned, but the room behind me was empty. When I looked back at the reflection, she was gone. Yet somehow I knew with bone-deep certainty This had been the first of my 5 visitations. What final secret had kept Clara bound to this place for over a century? What truth remained hidden that even Emily didn't know? The locket grew impossibly cold against my palm, like ice that didn't melt, and I understood with sudden clarity. Clara had chosen me to uncover the final piece of her story. 4 more appearances would come. After the 5th, I would either know the whole truth or join her in whatever limbo she had occupied these many decades. The locket's cold metal burned against my palm as I drove back to my hotel, the roads empty under a waxing moon. This artifact represented something deeply personal, not just evidence of Clara's existence, but a memento of the twins' connection. The dried blood suggested it had been present during the fatal procedure, perhaps clutched in Clara's hand during her final moments. I needed to understand more about the medical theories that had led to such a barbaric treatment. In my hotel room, I accessed digital archives of medical journals from the early 20th century. What I found disturbed me profoundly. The prevailing theories about epilepsy during that era veered between the scientific and the superstitious. Some physicians were beginning to understand its neurological basis, while others still attributed seizures to moral failings, demonic influences, or tainted bloodlines. Twin studies held particular fascination. Medical journals from 1909 and 1910 contained several papers theorizing that when one twin exhibited abnormalities, the other carried the same defect in dormant form. Some physicians advocated separating such twins to prevent the healthy one from manifesting symptoms through sympathetic response. One article caught my attention, authored by Dr. Elias Crenshaw, the same physician who had visited Holloway before Clara's appearance. He specifically advocated surgical intervention for epileptic children, claiming success rates that seemed medically impossible for that era. His theories about twins contained a chilling recommendation. If one twin showed symptoms while the other appeared healthy, preventative intervention might be justified for both. Had Mrs. Blackstone hidden Clara not just from bureaucratic documentation, but to protect Emily from the doctor's preventative scalpel? Sleep eluded me that night. Around 3 in the morning, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. The locket, which I'd placed on the nightstand, fell to the floor with a distinct ping. When I retrieved it, I found it had opened to reveal a 3rd compartment I hadn't noticed before, containing a tiny folded paper. Under the lamp's glow, I carefully unfolded it to find a lock of light brown hair tied with thread. Written beneath in a child's unsteady script, "For when they take me away, remember I was real." Clara had anticipated being erased. As I held the fragile strand of hair, the bathroom faucet turned on by itself. Steam billowed from the sink as water flowed scalding hot. When I approached cautiously, I found words traced in the condensation on the mirror. She knew before the 2nd visitation. By morning, the message had evaporated like it never existed. Only the water damage on the bathroom counter convinced me it hadn't been a dream. I returned to the archives with new purpose, searching specifically for records relating to Dr. Crenshaw. If he had identified Emily as Clara's twin, what had he planned? And who was the she who knew before? Mrs. Blackstone? Mrs. Harlow? Or someone else entirely? The answer likely lay in what happened after Clara's death, in the outbreak that followed, in Emily's enforced silence, and in whatever desperate measures had been taken to hide not just a body, but an entire truth that was still trying to be heard over a century later. As dawn broke, I found myself standing before the crumbling remains of Graywood Asylum, where Mrs. Blackstone had spent her final years. Though largely demolished in 1958, one wing remained standing, converted into administrative offices for the county mental health department. The building loomed against the pale sky, its weathered brick facade holding secrets I now felt compelled to uncover. I had obtained permission to examine Graywood's patient records through a formal research request. The administrator, a harried man named Dr. Parsons, led me through sterile hallways to a basement archive. Most of the historical records were transferred to the state repository, he explained, unlocking a heavy door. But some personal effects and administrative documents remained on site. Not much call for them these days. The room smelled of mildew and abandonment. Metal shelving units contained dozens of cardboard boxes labeled by year. I moved directly to the section marked 1932 through 1934. "I'll leave you to it," Dr. Parsons said. "Building closes at 5. Hours passed as I sifted through admission records, staff notes, and treatment logs. Mrs. Blackstone's file contained the expected documentation, psychiatric evaluations diagnosing delusional psychosis, treatment protocols involving hydrotherapy and sedatives, and notes about her continued insistence that a child named Clara visited her room. Then I found something unexpected, a thin folder labeled "Patient Possessions, Destroyed." Inside was an inventory of items that had belonged to Mrs. Blackstone, confiscated upon her admission and apparently incinerated after her death as per asylum policy. Most were mundane: clothing, a Bible, reading glasses, but one entry stood out: journal, leather-bound, containing delusions regarding deceased child, destroyed per Dr. Crenshaw's directive, March 18, 1933. Dr. Crenshaw, the same physician who had visited Holloway Orphanage. He had somehow become involved in Mrs. Blackstone's treatment decades later, and had specifically ordered the destruction of her personal writings. Digging deeper into administrative records, I discovered Dr. Crenshaw had not been regularly employed at Greywood. He had been brought in specifically to consult on Mrs. Blackstone's case, at the request of someone whose name had been redacted from the documents. A staff log provided one more crucial detail. On the night of Mrs. Blackstone's death, 3 visitors had been recorded entering the asylum outside of normal visiting hours. Dr. Crenshaw and 2 individuals identified only as medical observers. The cause of death listed was heart failure following prolonged melancholia. No autopsy had been performed. Her body had been cremated within 24 hours. As I closed the final folder, the lights flickered briefly. The temperature plummeted, my breath forming clouds in the suddenly frigid air. A filing cabinet across the room opened by itself, a single folder sliding to the floor with a soft thump. When I retrieved it, I found photographs of Mrs. Blackstone's room after her death. The asylum staff had documented the strange markings she'd apparently scratched into the wall behind her bed, a child's outline beside what appeared to be a series of numbers. When enlarged, the numbers became clear: coordinates. They pointed to a location just 3 miles from the orphanage, the former residence of Dr. Elias Crenshaw. The third visitation had come, guiding me toward whatever terrible truth had bound 3 souls together across time: Clara, Mrs. Blackstone, and the doctor who connected them both. The coordinates led me to a modest Victorian house on the outskirts of town, now serving as a local historical society museum. The property had indeed belonged to Dr. Crenshaw until his death in 1942. I arrived just before closing time, introducing myself to the elderly volunteer as a researcher interested in early medical practices. "Dr. Crenshaw's collection is quite remarkable," she said, leading me to a room preserved as his office. He was considered progressive in his time, though some of his methods would horrify us today. The office contained a glass-fronted cabinet filled with medical instruments, leather-bound journals, and specimen jars. My attention was drawn to a framed medical diploma on the wall, not from a prestigious institution as I'd expected, but from the Berwyn Institute of Medical Research, an organization I'd never encountered in my studies. "What can you tell me about the Berwyn Institute?" I asked. The volunteer frowned slightly. "Not much in official records. It was privately funded, focused on hereditary conditions. Closed after some scandal in 1915. As she continued describing the exhibits, I noticed a small leather case partially hidden behind larger items in the cabinet. Something about its placement seemed deliberate, visible yet obscured, like someone wanted it both preserved and overlooked. "Could I examine that case?" I asked. She hesitated before retrieving it. "This wasn't part of the original display. Someone donated it anonymously about 30 years ago." Inside lay a tarnished silver instrument resembling a small drill with various attachments, a trepanation kit. The volunteer quickly closed the case, seeming uncomfortable. "Dr. Crenshaw was known for his interest in twin studies," I mentioned casually. "Are there records of his research subjects?" "Nothing comprehensive," she replied, "though there's a photograph you might find interesting." She directed me to a small alcove containing what appeared to be personal rather than professional memorabilia. Among family photographs stood one showing Dr. Crenshaw with a young woman in nursing attire. The caption read, "Elias and daughter Ruth, 1911. The young woman's face hit me like a physical blow. I'd seen it before in the background of the Holloway photograph, barely visible through a window. Ruth Crenshaw had been present at the orphanage when the mysterious photo was taken. "Did his daughter follow him into medicine?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "In her way. Never formally trained, but assisted with his research." The volunteer lowered her voice. "There were rumors she was particularly involved with his twin studies, identifying subjects, maintaining records. As the museum closed, I lingered in the parking lot, examining photographs I'd surreptitiously taken. Under magnification on my phone, I noticed something in the image of Elias and Ruth. She wore a locket identical to the one I'd found at Holloway. That night in my hotel room, I spread everything before me: the locket, the coordinates, the museum photographs. The connection was forming. Ruth Crenshaw had been her father's accomplice, helping identify and acquire subjects for his twin research. Had she been present during Clara's fatal procedure? Had she formed some bond with the twins that led to later regrets? As I reached for the locket, it sprang open by itself, revealing a tiny folded paper I hadn't noticed before. Inside, in faded ink, "Forgive me. I tried to save both." The fourth visitation had come, not as a spectral manifestation, but as evidence pointing toward a woman caught between family loyalty and moral horror. Ruth Crenshaw, the final piece of this tragic puzzle. I traced Ruth Crenshaw's life through census records and newspaper archives until dawn broke. She had never married, remaining with her father until his death, after which she became a recluse. The final mention of her was a tiny obituary from 1963, 5 years after the photograph reappeared. With trembling fingers, I cross-referenced the date of Ruth's death with Emily's timeline. It matched precisely when Emily claimed to have seen Clara for the fifth and final time. The connection was unmistakable now. Ruth had been present during Clara's death, had perhaps even assisted her father with the fatal procedure. She'd spent the remainder of her life carrying this secret, possibly attempting to make amends in ways I was only beginning to understand. I returned to Emily's assisted living facility without an appointment. Catherine wasn't there, but a sympathetic nurse allowed me 5 minutes alone with the elderly woman. "Emily," I said gently, placing the locket in her gnarled hand, "I need to ask about Ruth Crenshaw. Did you know her? Was she there the night Clara died?" Emily's eyes widened in recognition. One slow, deliberate blink. "Yes." "Did she help you afterward? Perhaps leave you messages or the photograph?" Another blink. Her fingers closed around the locket with surprising strength. "The fifth time you saw Clara, was it when Ruth died?" Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she blinked once more. As I prepared to leave, Emily suddenly gripped my wrist with unexpected force. Her mouth worked silently before she managed to form a single raspy word. "Twins." Confusion washed over me. "Yes, you and Clara were twins." She shook her head forcefully, then pointed at a photograph of Catherine on her nightstand, then to the locket, then held up 3 fingers. Understanding dawned. 3 generations of twins. One blink. Yes. Catherine hadn't mentioned being a twin. Was it possible she didn't know? That night, I awakened to the sound of a music box playing somewhere in my hotel room, a tinkling lullaby that raised goosebumps along my arms. The locket levitated from the nightstand, spinning slowly in midair before dropping to the carpeted floor. When I retrieved it, I found it containing something new, a tarnished key. The temperature plunged as a child's handprint appeared in the condensation on my window, followed by more prints forming a path toward my door. The 5th visitation had begun. I followed the ethereal trail into the hallway, down the emergency stairs, and out into the moonlit parking lot. The key in my palm grew colder with every step, guiding me like a dowsing rod. I knew where I needed to go. Not to the orphanage or cemetery or asylum, but to Catherine Prescott's home. Whatever final truth Clara needed revealed involved not just the past, but the present. Not just her story, but the continuation of it through bloodlines that carried forward both gifts and curses. The mystery had never been just about a forgotten child in an old photograph. It was about the hereditary legacy that Dr. Crenshaw had studied and feared, one that might still manifest in Emily's descendants today. The modest suburban home sat dark and silent as I approached. Catherine's silver sedan parked in the driveway, confirming she was home. The key in my palm had warmed slightly, pulsing with an almost imperceptible rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Standing on her porch at 3 in the morning, I hesitated before the door. What explanation could I possibly offer for this intrusion? Before I could decide, the porch light flickered on by itself. The door swung open to reveal Catherine in a bathrobe, her expression not surprised but resigned, as if she'd been expecting me. "You found the key," she said simply, stepping aside to let me enter. Inside, the house was warm and tastefully decorated, family photographs lining the hallway. Catherine led me to her study without speaking, only pausing to glance back once, as if confirming she wasn't being followed by something only she could see. "I've had the same dream 5 nights in a row," she said finally, closing the study door behind us. A little girl telling me you would come with the key. Clara's key. My skin prickled. You know about Clara? Not until the dreams started. She gestured to an antique secretary desk in the corner. But I've always had this. It belonged to my mother, and her mother before that. The key in my hand seemed to pull toward the small lock on the desk's upper cabinet. When inserted, it turned with a soft click that seemed to echo in the quiet house. Inside was a leather portfolio, its surface cracked with age. I could never open it, Catherine whispered. I thought it was just an old piece of furniture with a lost key. The portfolio contained dozens of yellowing papers, medical records, correspondence, and hand-drawn diagrams of family trees. At the bottom lay a letter in an unsealed envelope, addressed simply, "For Emily's granddaughter, when the time comes." Catherine's hands trembled as she unfolded the fragile paper. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, as if written by someone elderly or ill. "My name is Ruth Crenshaw. By the time you read this, the sins of my father will have touched 4 generations of your family. What began as my father's obsession with twins and hereditary traits became a lifelong mission to conceal the truth. That the condition he called the falling sickness runs in your maternal line, appearing in one twin while sparing the other. Clara died because of our interference. Emily lived never knowing the truth, that her seizures were not cured but merely dormant, capable of emerging in future generations. The pattern repeats. One twin manifests symptoms, one does not. You have a twin sister. She was taken at birth under medical pretenses arranged by colleagues of my father who continued his work. Your mother was told the second baby died. This was a lie. I have spent my life tracking those separated by this cruel practice. Your sister lives in Seattle under the name Rachel Winters. Like Clara, she has experienced seizures since childhood. Like you, she deserves to know the truth. The visitations will end when you are reunited. Clara has made certain of that. Catherine looked up at me, her face drained of color. I have a twin, she whispered. My entire life I've felt like something was missing. Dreams of a girl who looked like me. Moments when I felt pain that wasn't mine. Outside the window, a small handprint appeared in the condensation, then another beside it. 2 small girls, separated by science but united by blood, reaching across time to heal what had been broken. The neatly arranged paperwork from Rachel Winters' life lay spread across Catherine's dining room table. Medical records, school photographs, newspaper clippings from dance recitals. Ruth Crenshaw had documented everything with meticulous precision, creating a shadow version of the family album Catherine's mother had kept. The similarities between the twins' lives were uncanny despite their separation. Both had studied music, both had chosen careers in education, both remained childless. She's had the seizures all her life, Catherine whispered, touching a medical report. While I never experienced a single one, I examined the most recent photograph of Rachel, taken just 2 years ago according to the notation. The resemblance to Catherine was striking, though Rachel's face showed subtle signs of the toll her condition had taken. Her eyes held the same wary alertness I'd seen in Emily's. I've booked a flight to Seattle for tomorrow morning, Catherine said, her voice finding new resolve. Will you come with me? I don't think I can face this alone. Before I could answer, the locket on the table sprang open by itself, the small lock of Clara's hair rising slightly on an unfelt breeze. I don't think you'll be alone regardless, I said quietly. The flight to Seattle passed in tense silence, Catherine alternating between studying Ruth's files and staring out the window at the clouds below. Occasionally she would touch her temple and wince, as if experiencing phantom pain. I can feel her, she said once, not looking at me. The closer we get, the stronger it becomes. Rachel's apartment building was modest but well-maintained, located near the elementary school where she taught music. Catherine hesitated before the intercom, her finger hovering over the button for apartment 23. What if she doesn't believe me? She whispered. As if in answer, the building door unlocked itself with an audible click. We exchanged glances before stepping inside. On the second floor, apartment 23 stood with its door slightly ajar. A woman's voice called from within before we could knock. I've been expecting you. Rachel Winters sat in a wheelchair by the window, her resemblance to Catherine even more pronounced in person. Her hands rested on an antique music box, identical to the one I'd heard playing during Clara's 5th visitation. You're exactly how you appear in my dreams, she said to Catherine, her voice steady despite the tears forming in her eyes. I always thought they were just wishes taking shape while I slept. Ruth Crenshaw left records, Catherine began, her voice breaking. We're twins. They told our mother I had died. Rachel nodded slowly. The dreams became more frequent recently. A little girl kept showing me your face, telling me you would come. Her fingers touched the music box. She said once we were reunited, she could finally rest. The locket in my pocket grew suddenly, intensely warm. When I removed it, the clasp opened to reveal the two tiny photographs inside had changed. Where once they showed the separated twins, Clara and Emily, they now displayed Catherine and Rachel, united at last. Outside the window, the figure of a small girl in an old-fashioned dress appeared briefly in the reflection, her face peaceful as she faded from view for the final time. Throughout the months that followed, Catherine and Rachel worked to rebuild what had been systematically taken from them. Weekly video calls became bi-monthly visits, each reunion strengthening their connection. The twins discovered shared mannerisms neither could have learned from the other, the way they both tilted their heads while listening intently, how they absently traced patterns with their fingertips when deep in thought. Emily's health declined rapidly after the reunion. The nurses said she seemed at peace, often smiling at empty corners of her room as if seeing someone there. When she passed in her sleep 3 months later, Catherine and Rachel sat together at the funeral, holding hands as they faced the unmarked north corner of the cemetery where Clara still lay. I remained in contact with them, my academic interest in the case gradually transforming into genuine friendship. We agreed that publishing the full story would honor those who had suffered and perhaps prevent similar separations in the future. Modern science had long since discredited the eugenic theories that had torn apart these families, but institutional secrecy still protected those who had perpetuated such practices. The Berwyn Institute's remaining records proved difficult to locate. Most had been destroyed in the 1950s, likely by the same network of physicians who had continued Dr. Crenshaw's work. Yet, through persistent research, I discovered 17 other sets of twins separated under similar pretenses between 1911 and 1963. Catherine and Rachel helped me contact 7 of these pairs who were still living. On the anniversary of our discovery of Ruth's letter, I received a package from the twins. Inside was the locket, now restored to its original luster, and a note explaining they felt it belonged with me and my research. That night, I placed it beside my bed before falling into exhausted sleep. I awoke to faint music, not the tinkling lullaby from before, but a soft humming that seemed to emanate from the locket itself. When I reached for it, I found it warm to the touch, as if recently held. It opened without resistance to reveal something new nestled beside Clara's lock of hair, a tiny folded paper containing an address in faded ink. The location led to an abandoned storage facility outside Morriston, scheduled for demolition the following week. With permission from the property manager, I discovered a hidden room containing 6 metal filing cabinets. Inside were the complete records of the Berwyn Institute, patient files, correspondence, and detailed reports of twin separations spanning 5 decades. Among these documents was Dr. Crenshaw's personal journal, revealing how his research had evolved from medical inquiry into something darker. His final entries showed growing paranoia about his daughter Ruth's sentimental attachment to their subjects, and his suspicion she was documenting his work to eventually expose it. The records provided enough evidence to identify dozens more separated twins across the country. Some had lived full lives never knowing what they'd lost. Others had struggled with inexplicable emptiness they couldn't name. All deserved to know the truth. Clara's story wasn't finished. It had merely transformed from a mystery about one forgotten child into a mission to reunite all those who had been deliberately erased from their own narratives. The Berwyn Institute's records opened a door to something far deeper than I had anticipated. Among the meticulous documentation of separated twins, I discovered a classified section marked with a simple red line, cases considered anomalous. These weren't just twins with epilepsy or other recognizable conditions. They were children who had demonstrated unexplainable capabilities. Ruth Crenshaw's private notes, hidden within apparently mundane medical observations, documented instances of twin pairs who could sense each other's thoughts across distances, feel each other's physical pain, or even, in one extraordinary case, share visual perceptions when one twin was blindfolded. Clara and Emily had been classified as Category 3, twins demonstrating parasensory connectivity during seizure states. Dr. Crenshaw's notes described how Clara, during her episodes, would recite Emily's experiences verbatim despite having no possible way of knowing them. What he initially dismissed as coincidence became a pattern too precise to ignore. The subject demonstrates knowledge that cannot be attributed to conventional means, he wrote. During episode 17, patient accurately described sister's activities at foster placement 23 miles distant, including conversations with caretakers that were subsequently verified. What began as scientific curiosity transformed into fear. The final entry before Clara's death revealed his true motivation for separating the twins. The connection between subjects presents concerning national security implications. If such abilities could be harnessed or weaponized, conventional information safeguards would be rendered obsolete. The war was still 3 years away, but military interests were already exploring unconventional intelligence methods. The Berwyn Institute had received substantial government funding channeled through shell corporations and private donors. This explained why Ruth had been so meticulously documenting everything, not just out of guilt, but to preserve evidence of capabilities that might otherwise be dismissed as fantasy or delusion. The proof had been hidden in plain sight in Clara's effects. The locket, the hair, the small slips of paper, physical artifacts that connected the twins even after separation. Catherine and Rachel confirmed my suspicions when they shared something they'd initially been reluctant to reveal. In the months since their reunion, they had begun experiencing moments of shared consciousness. Catherine would suddenly know Rachel was having a seizure before any call came. Rachel would wake from dreams knowing exactly what Catherine had done the previous day. "We thought we might be imagining it," Catherine admitted during our video call, "or that it was just twins being twins. But it's more than that, isn't it?" The final piece fell into place when I examined Ruth's personal effects preserved alongside the Institute records. A sealed envelope contained her last letter, never delivered, addressed to Emily on her 80th birthday. "What my father feared was not your condition but your potential. Clara didn't die from a failed procedure. She died because she demonstrated too clearly what you both could do during her seizure that day." He panicked. "I've spent my life protecting those like you from those like him. The 5th visitation will come when you are ready to understand. Some connections transcend physical separation, even death." Clara proved that. The Seattle autumn brought early twilight as Catherine and Rachel sat with me in a small cafe near the waterfront. 6 months had passed since their reunion, and the bond between them had strengthened in ways that extended beyond normal sibling connection. The locket lay open on the table between us, its contents now including strands of hair from 4 generations. Clara, Emily, and now the newly reunited twins. "We think we've located others," Rachel said quietly, sliding a folder toward me. 3 more sets of twins from the Berwyn files who are still alive, all with the same pattern. One with seizures, one without. Catherine nodded. "When we're together during Rachel's episodes, I can see things. Past moments, fragments of memories that aren't mine." She hesitated. "Some belong to women we've never met, yet somehow I know their names." The Crenshaw records called it genetic memory transference, I noted, examining the photographs Rachel had compiled. They theorized the seizures weren't just a medical condition but a kind of doorway, moments when consciousness could flow between connected minds. What had begun as historical research had evolved into something that challenged my understanding of reality. These weren't just separated families, but people with extraordinary connections, capabilities that had frightened men like Dr. Crenshaw enough to justify their separation. "We dreamed of Clara again last night," Rachel said, her fingers tracing the edge of the locket. "Both of us, the same dream." She showed us a room beneath the old Holloway building. There's something there she once found. 3 days later, we stood in the basement of the former orphanage, now scheduled for renovation into luxury apartments. The developer had reluctantly granted us access after Catherine mentioned certain historical preservation requirements that might complicate his permits. A convenient fiction that bought us 2 hours of uninterrupted exploration. "There," Rachel pointed to a section of wall that appeared no different from the others. "Behind there." When the maintenance worker reluctantly removed several bricks, a small cavity appeared, containing a metal box sealed with wax. Inside were dozens of small cloth dolls, each with a name tag sewn into the backing. Clara and Emily's dolls lay at the center, connected by red thread stitched between their hearts. "Mrs. Blackstone made one for every child," Catherine whispered, somehow knowing this without being told, "but she created the twins' dolls differently. The maintenance worker stepped back, visibly uncomfortable. "This whole building's been giving me the creeps since demolition started upstairs. Lights turning on by themselves. Tools moving overnight." I examined the remaining dolls, matching names to the Berwyn files. 14 pairs of twins. Their dolls connected by similar red threads. These weren't merely toys, but tangible symbols of connections someone had tried to sever. Connections that persisted despite everything. That night, Clara appeared in my dreams for the first time. Not as the frightened child from the orphanage photograph, but as she might have been had she lived, a woman my age, with Emily's knowing eyes and quiet dignity. "Find them all," she said simply. "The thread never breaks. It only stretches." The twins seemed to multiply around us as summer faded into autumn. Each pair we contacted responded with the same mixture of disbelief, recognition, and validation. Their lives had been shaped by the same pattern of separation, followed by inexplicable connection, sensations they'd often hidden from others for fear of being dismissed as delusional. We gathered at Emily's former home, now Catherine's inheritance, on what would have been Clara's 120th birthday. 14 pairs of twins, aged 36 to 94, filled the modest living room. Some came in wheelchairs, others with assistance dogs trained to respond to seizure activity. The dolls from Holloway were arranged on a table in the center, each pair reconnected with their red threads. "The seizures were never the problem," explained Marianne, one of the oldest living subjects. "They were the solution. When traditional senses shut down, something else opens up." Her twin sister Margaret nodded. "It's like tuning a radio. Most people hear static, but we catch frequencies others can't access." I watched as Rachel experienced a seizure during our gathering, her body tensing as Catherine instinctively moved to support her. The other twins grew silent, many closing their eyes or reaching for their siblings' hands. Later, several reported receiving the same mental image during that moment. Clara and Emily as children, running through Holloway's garden toward each other rather than away. The locket had transformed into something beyond a mere artifact. When opened near the reunited twins, it seemed to strengthen their connections, allowing even those without active seizures to momentarily access shared consciousness. Through these glimpses, we assembled fragments of what had really happened at Holloway in 1911. Clara hadn't been entirely erased. Mrs. Blackstone had not merely hidden her existence, but had recognized something in the twins that resonated with forgotten wisdom from her own lineage. The dolls were her attempt to preserve what Dr. Crenshaw sought to destroy, tangible anchors for connections that transcended physical proximity. The fifth visitation was never about vengeance, Catherine explained as the gathering concluded. It was about completion. Clara couldn't rest until the pattern was recognized and the separations healed. That night, as the last of our guests departed, Rachel wheeled herself to the window overlooking the garden where I'd planted twin saplings to mark our discovery. "They're still trying to replicate it, you know," she said quietly. "Different agencies, different names than the Berwyn Institute, but the same objectives. Finding pairs like us, studying what happens when we connect." Catherine joined her sister, their reflections merging in the glass. "But they're missing what Mrs. Blackstone understood. The connection can't be weaponized because it doesn't originate in fear or control. It comes from something deeper." As if responding to her words, the locket on the mantelpiece opened by itself, the small lock of Clara's hair rising slightly before settling again. For a moment I could have sworn I saw a child's reflection in the window, not sorrowful as before, but smiling with quiet satisfaction at seeing her long mission nearing completion. The light in the archive room flickered as I transcribed the final pages of Ruth Crenshaw's journal. The truth had been fragmented across decades, obscured by institutional power and scientific ambition, but now crystallized before me with terrible clarity. Dr. Crenshaw hadn't merely separated twins with unusual connections. He had attempted to artificially create those connections where they didn't exist naturally. The Berwyn Institute's most classified experiments involved inducing seizures in ordinary children, then placing them in proximity to others during these vulnerable neurological states, attempting to forge synthetic bonds between unrelated minds. Most attempts failed catastrophically, but in twin pairs with natural connections, the results exceeded anything the Institute had anticipated. Clara and Emily represented their most promising case, not just sensing each other's experiences, but occasionally manifesting physical symptoms simultaneously, despite separation. The procedure that killed Clara hadn't been aimed at curing her seizures at all. Dr. Crenshaw had attempted to surgically sever the connection between the twins while preserving the abilities he coveted. Ruth's journal described how her father had theorized that the connection resided in a specific region of the brain that could be isolated and manipulated. The trepanation was meant to access this region, not eliminate the seizures. Mrs. Blackstone hadn't hidden Clara to protect her from documentation. She had hidden her to prevent Dr. Crenshaw from experimenting on both twins simultaneously, a procedure he believed would allow him to redirect their connection toward a third party, toward himself. The dolls weren't merely symbolic. Each contained small locks of hair, fingernail clippings, even blood stains from the children they represented. DNA connections created in cloth and thread when the physical connections were severed. Mrs. Blackstone, descended from practitioners of folk traditions older than modern medicine, understood what Dr. Crenshaw sought to exploit through science. The fifth visitation had never been about vengeance or even justice. Clara's appearances, to Mrs. Blackstone, to Emily, to Ruth, to Catherine, and finally to me, had been attempts to complete a circuit broken by violence. Each appearance transferred fragments of memory, building toward the reconstitution of knowledge deliberately scattered to prevent its misuse. I understood now why the locket responded to proximity between the twins, why Clara had chosen me specifically to uncover the truth. The photograph hadn't simply captured 15 children instead of 14. It had captured a moment when Clara existed in two states simultaneously, both physically present and somehow elsewhere, her consciousness already beginning to transcend conventional boundaries even before her death. The scarlet fever that swept through Holloway hadn't been coincidence or contamination. It had been the first manifestation of what the Berwyn Institute would later call sympathetic biological response, Clara's connection to the others continuing beyond physical death, her suffering echoing through those with whom she'd formed bonds. The unconsecrated earth in the north corner contained more than Clara's physical remains. It held the first documented case of what consciousness might become when freed from its expected limitations, a truth so profound that generations of powerful interests had worked to keep it buried. The revelation of the Berwyn Institute's experiments transformed my understanding of Clara's story. This wasn't merely historical documentation of medical malpractice, but evidence of capabilities systematically suppressed for over a century. The twins' connections represented something profound about human consciousness that powerful institutions had actively worked to conceal. In the weeks following our gathering, several research facilities contacted Catherine and Rachel, offering substantial compensation for participation in cognitive studies. Their sudden interest confirmed Ruth's warning. The pattern was repeating with modern refinement. We declined all overtures, recognizing the familiar language of scientific curiosity masking institutional control. Meanwhile, strange phenomena continued around the twins we'd reunited. Objects moved without explanation. Electrical devices malfunctioned during seizure episodes. Most significantly, medical scans revealed unprecedented neurological changes in twins who spent time together after decades of separation, their brain patterns gradually synchronizing, creating what one bewildered doctor called mirror consciousness. Emily's former home became our unofficial headquarters, its walls now covered with maps tracking Berwyn Institute connections across decades. We identified 47 additional twin separations between 1911 and 1974, when the Institute apparently disbanded. Of these, 29 pairs might still be alive. The dolls proved more significant than we'd initially realized. When placed near their corresponding twins, subtle changes occurred. Seizures became less debilitating while cognitive connections strengthened. The red thread connecting each pair seemed to conduct energy in ways modern instruments couldn't quantify, but the twins could undeniably feel. Clara's influence extended beyond her cemetery plot. The unmarked grave in the north corner had become a pilgrimage site for the reunited twins. Flowers appeared without explanation. Visitors reported sensing a profound peace in that specific location. Ground-penetrating radar revealed something unexpected beneath the surface. Not just human remains, but a perfect circle of objects surrounding them, each corresponding to the location of a Holloway child in the 1911 photograph. Mrs. Blackstone had created a physical circuit in earth and bone, preserving connections that transcended conventional understanding. Most significant was the change in Rachel's condition. After 6 months of regular contact with Catherine, her seizures hadn't disappeared but had transformed. Rather than losing consciousness, She now remained aware during episodes, describing them as windows opening between worlds. Catherine could simultaneously access these perceptions when holding her sister's hand. Clara wasn't trying to expose wrongdoing, Rachel explained during one such episode. She was trying to complete what was interrupted. The separation wasn't just about twins being apart. It was about fragmenting a form of consciousness that emerges when certain minds connect. The implications extended far beyond historical justice for separated families. What Clara had begun showing us challenged fundamental assumptions about individual consciousness and the supposed boundaries between minds. If these connections were natural rather than paranormal, what else about human potential had been systematically hidden, pathologized, or deliberately obscured? I understood now why Dr. Crenshaw and his colleagues had been so determined to control these phenomena. Power does not easily surrender its most precious currency, the definition of what is possible. The photograph from Holloway Children's Home now rests in a custom archival frame in the small museum we established to document the Berwyn Institute's legacy. Unlike conventional displays that separate viewers from artifacts with glass barriers, this exhibit encourages visitors to touch the photograph's frame, to establish the physical connection that has proven so essential to understanding Clara's story. The image itself has subtly transformed over time. Conservators notice the blurring around Clara's face has gradually shifted, becoming more distinct, while other elements in the photograph have faded. Scientific analysis revealed no conventional explanation, yet the twins who visit often report the same observation. Clara appears to be looking not at the camera but directly at them across the century that separates them. Catherine and Rachel decided against publishing a conventional academic paper about our discoveries. Instead, they created a secure digital registry for separated twins and their descendants, accessible only to those with direct genetic connections to the Berwyn subjects. This approach has allowed information to flow while protecting the privacy of those still coming to terms with their extraordinary capabilities. The registry has grown to include 173 individuals across 4 generations, each gradually reclaiming knowledge that was systematically removed from their family narratives. Through this network, patterns have emerged that extend beyond epilepsy, shared dreams, synchronized illnesses, and in several remarkable cases, completely identical creative works produced simultaneously, despite geographic separation. Emily's modest inheritance, combined with contributions from grateful families, funded the restoration of Clara's burial site. The cemetery's north corner now features a simple granite marker reading, "Clara, beloved sister." The connection remains unbroken. Visitors often report leaving with a profound sense of peace that lingers for days afterward. The locket has developed an unusual property that defies conventional explanation. When placed between reunited twins during moments of connection, it captures their shared consciousness in miniature photographs that appear beside the original images of Clara and Emily. The scientists we've cautiously consulted can offer no explanation beyond vague theories about photosensitive materials and environmental factors, explanations that feel deliberately insufficient. Mrs. Blackstone's dolls have been returned to descendants of the original Holloway children, their red threads now extending between families separated by continents but connected by shared history. Each doll seems to serve as both memorial and conduit, preserving a tangible link to relationships that institutional power attempted to sever. As for me, my academic career has taken an unexpected turn. What began as historical research into an orphanage photograph has transformed into a more profound investigation into consciousness itself. Universities have proven reluctant to engage with evidence that challenges established paradigms, but the twins and their families provide an audience more interested in truth than institutional validation. Clara's story continues to unfold through those she helped reunite. The 5th visitation was never truly the last. It was simply the point at which her consciousness expanded beyond appearances to a single witness, becoming instead a presence recognized by all who learn to see beyond conventional boundaries. The rain fell in a gentle mist over the small gathering at Holloway Cemetery, transforming the autumn light into a soft golden haze. 1 year had passed since we'd discovered the truth about Clara and the Berwyn Institute. The twins we'd reunited stood in a semicircle around the granite marker in the north corner, their faces serene despite the weather. Catherine and Rachel occupied the center position, their hands linked as they placed twin white roses on the once unmarked grave. "We've located the last of them," Catherine announced quietly. "The Berwyn files are complete. The final pair had been the most difficult to find. Identical sisters separated in 1968, one adopted by a military family that relocated frequently, the other raised in a remote community that deliberately avoided modern record-keeping. Their reunion last week had been particularly powerful, with lights throughout the hospital flickering in synchrony with their embraces. What none of us had anticipated was the cumulative effect of these reunions. Each pair reconnected seemed to strengthen something larger than themselves, a network of consciousness that extended beyond individual minds. The dolls responded to this growing energy, their red threads sometimes glowing faintly in darkened rooms when multiple twins gathered nearby. Dr. Eliza Chen, the neurologist who had cautiously joined our research, documented unprecedented patterns in the twins' brain scans, neural synchronization that appeared to transfer limited but measurable information across conventional sensory boundaries. She had abandoned her prestigious university position when her department head demanded she cease this pseudo-scientific pursuit, choosing instead to establish an independent research foundation funded by families determined to understand their inherited capabilities. "It was never just about finding them all," Rachel said, her wheelchair positioned precisely at the edge of Clara's grave. "It was about reconstituting what was deliberately fragmented, not just families, but knowledge itself." The locket, now suspended in a specially designed case in our small museum, had developed new peculiarities. Visitors genetically related to the Berwyn subjects reported seeing different images within it depending on their specific lineage, fragments of memories not their own, yet somehow part of their inherited consciousness. Most remarkable was what happened during the synchronized sessions, when multiple twin pairs experienced seizure states simultaneously. Their collected testimony described consistent journeys to what they called the overlapping space, a consciousness neither fully present nor absent, where information separated by time and distance became temporarily accessible. In this space, Clara was not a ghost or memory, but a continuing presence, the first to cross a threshold that institutional science had attempted to seal shut. What Dr. Crenshaw had feared as dangerous abnormality was gradually revealing itself as evolutionary potential. The rain intensified briefly before ceasing altogether, sunlight breaking through to illuminate the cemetery with unexpected brilliance. Catherine opened the small journal we'd been recording these experiences in, its pages filled with testimony from twins across 4 generations. "Time to document the final chapter," she said softly. I nodded, acutely aware that Clara's story wasn't ending but transforming, from historical investigation to something that would challenge humanity's understanding of consciousness for generations to come. The epilogue would not be written on paper but in the connected minds of those who carried this inheritance forward. Standing before the newly established Holloway Memorial Museum on its opening day, I find myself drawn once more to where this journey began, the photograph itself. It sits in a custom-crafted oak frame at the center of the main exhibit, no longer merely an anomalous image but a doorway of sorts, understood differently by each visitor who stands before it. The restoration process revealed details previously obscured by time and neglect. Clara's face, once blurred, now appears in perfect clarity, while the surrounding figures have softened slightly, as if receding into history while she steps forward across time. Conservation experts remain unable to explain the physical changes to the emulsion and paper. Visitors often report feeling a gentle warmth when touching the frame, especially those with familial connections to twin separations. Several have left notes describing how Clara seemed to meet their eyes directly, her gaze following them throughout the room. Catherine and Rachel visit monthly, their connection now so profound they frequently complete each other's sentences without conscious effort. Their research foundation has documented over 200 similar cases worldwide, institutional separations spanning decades and continents, all following the pattern first identified at Holloway. The dolls have been reunited with descendants of the children they represent, each serving as a tangible reminder of connections that transcend institutional attempts at severance. When brought together for special occasions, they seem to generate a subtle energy that affects electronic equipment and occasionally manifests as unexplained lights captured in visitors' photographs. Emily's gravestone now stands beside Clara's, the twins reunited in death as they should have been in life. Between them grows a single white rosebush that blooms year-round despite Morriston's harsh winters, something the groundskeeper has given up trying to explain. The Berwyn Institute's records have been preserved and made accessible to researchers. though certain government agencies continue attempting to acquire them through increasingly transparent legal maneuvers. Their interest only confirms what we've long suspected. The capacities Clara first manifested remain objects of institutional desire and fear. What began as historical research has transformed our understanding of consciousness itself. The rigid boundaries between minds that modern science takes for granted appear increasingly permeable when viewed through the lens of what the separated twins experience. Clara's visitations weren't supernatural events, but glimpses of consciousness extending beyond conventional limitations. I find myself returning to this photograph in quiet moments, studying the 15 children arranged on Holloway's steps. 14 documented, 1 officially erased. Yet it was the erased child who ultimately ensured that none of them would be forgotten. The camera captured more than just subjects arranged before its lens that summer day in 1911. It recorded a moment when conventional reality briefly thinned, allowing something extraordinary to imprint itself on silver nitrate and paper, a connection that refused to be severed by scalpels, institutional records, or time itself. As visitors move through the exhibit, many pause before leaving to touch the frame one final time. Some claim to hear a faint melody, the same lullaby the music box played during Clara's visitations. Others simply feel a profound sense that they've been seen and recognized by someone beyond the photograph's sepia tones. The mystery endures, not because it remains unsolved, but because its solution opens doors to greater mysteries still. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.